Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the history of a nation that's always been defined by a powerful, constant swing, kind of like a pendulum, back and forth between East and West, between total freedom and foreign rule. We're going to unpack 1,000 years of Czech history to try and understand its future.
So, let's start with a little puzzle from the near future. Picture this, it's 2026. A pro-Western Democratic president, a former NATO general no less, who won in a landslide, has to appoint his populist, Eurosceptic rival as the new prime minister. How on earth does that happen? How can a country so clearly choose one path, only to find itself heading down a completely different one just a few years later? Well, that question, it gets right to the very soul of the Czech identity. It's an identity that's been forged in this constant push and pull between huge outside forces and this fierce, unending desire to be in control of their own destiny. To solve this puzzle of the future, we have to go way back into the past.
So, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the land itself, right in the heart of Europe. Then we'll see it rise to a medieval golden age, fall into centuries of rebellion and foreign rule, survive the absolute chaos of the 20th century, and finally land right at the crossroads where the nation stands today.
Okay, let's get into it. Our story really has to begin with one thing: geography. For the Czech lands, your location on the map has always been your destiny, and their destiny was to be smack dab in the middle of Europe's biggest power struggles.
I want you to think of it like a bridge, or maybe a superhighway connecting different worlds. To the west, you've got the powerful Germanic Holy Roman Empire. To the east, the huge Slavic world with its ties to Byzantium. The Czech lands were that highway, a path for trade, for ideas, but also an invasion route for armies marching in every direction. This spot made them culturally rich for sure, but also incredibly vulnerable. It was a prize that surrounding empires were always fighting over.
So, the first real state to rise up from this crossroads was Great Moravia. It gets going in the 9th century, and it was the first major union of the West Slavs, the ancestors of today's Czechs and Slovaks. And right from the very beginning, they had to play this delicate balancing act just to survive, caught between these much bigger, much more ambitious neighbors.
And this is one of the most brilliant strategic moves in their entire early history. The prince, Rostislav, he's getting really worried about the growing power of the neighboring Franks. So what does he do? He pulls a power move. He completely bypasses Rome and invites missionaries to come straight from the Byzantine emperor. And these guys, Cyril and Methodius, they weren't just any missionaries. They brought with them a revolutionary tool, a written language for the Slavs. By translating the Bible into the local language, they laid down this powerful foundation for a totally distinct culture, one that wasn't controlled by either the Germans or the Latins. It was, in effect, a declaration of cultural independence.
That bold move, that early foundation of a unique identity, well, it set the stage for a period of unbelievable power. After Great Moravia eventually fell apart, a new power center rose up that would, for a time, dominate all of Europe, the Kingdom of Bohemia.
For a few hundred years, the local Přemyslid dynasty steadily built up Bohemia's power, finally becoming an official kingdom around 1198. But the real high point, the true golden age, that comes in the 14th century when one of Europe's most incredible rulers takes the throne, Charles IV.
I mean, the scale of what Charles IV accomplished is just staggering. He didn't just rule Bohemia, he made Prague the capital of the entire Holy Roman Empire. Suddenly, this city became the undisputed political, religious, and cultural center of Europe. He founded Charles University, a beacon of learning that pulled in scholars from all over. His kingdom was huge, and his money and influence gave us landmarks we can still see today, like the Charles Bridge. For one short, amazing period, Prague was literally the center of the Western world.
But you know how the story goes. That pendulum of history always swings back. The Golden Age was followed by centuries of brutal conflict. That same sense of a unique Czech identity that had bloomed under Charles IV was now about to be tested by religious war and foreign domination. It was the beginning of a long, painful struggle just to keep that identity alive.
And it all kicks off with this religious reformer, Jan Hus. He was challenging the Pope's authority decades before Martin Luther even showed up. When he was executed for it, it lit a fire across the land. The Hussite movement that followed was part religious reformation, part national rebellion. You had armies of Czech peasants and nobles using these incredible tactics, like the wagon fort, basically turning farm carts into mobile fortresses, and they defeated massive crusade after massive crusade sent by the emperor and the Pope. It was this stunning act of defiance that really forged a powerful anti-authoritarian streak deep in the Czech national character. But
that incredible run of defiance, it just couldn't last forever. In 1620, at the Battle of White Mountain, the Bohemian forces were absolutely crushed by the Catholic Habsburg armies. And this wasn't just a lost battle, it was a national catastrophe. Independence, gone. The Czech leadership was executed or exiled. The nation was forcibly brought back under Catholic rule and swallowed whole by the Austrian Habsburg Empire. This was the start of 300 years of foreign rule.
And you can literally see the long-term impact of that defeat right here. For those 300 years, German was the language of the government, of high society, of getting ahead. The pressure to assimilate was immense. So much so that by 1910, as this census shows, more than a third of the population in Bohemia was German-speaking. The Czech language and culture survived, but it was a constant uphill battle against Germanization.
So if the last few centuries were a slow burn, the 20th century is where things go into hyperdrive. The pendulum starts swinging faster and more violently than ever before, cramming centuries of change into just a few short decades. It would test the nation's will to survive to its absolute limit.
Just look at this timeline. It's an absolute whirlwind. After 300 long years, independence is finally won in 1918. But that democratic dream is shattered, first by the Nazis. Then, just as they're recovering, a Soviet-backed communist coup in 1948 plunges them into decades of brutal repression. There was a brief moment of hope in 1968, the famous Prague Spring, but that hope was literally crushed under the treads of Soviet tanks. And yet, that spirit of defiance never died. In 1989, in the Velvet Revolution, the people peacefully tore the whole rotten system down. Hope, subjugation, hope again. That became the rhythm of modern Czech history.
And that brings us right back to where we started, and back to our puzzle. See, the fall of communism wasn't the end of the story. It just reignited all the old tensions, that pull between East and West, between a liberal democracy and a more nationalist, populist streak. The very same forces that have shaped the last 1,000 years are right here, shaping the future. You can almost chart this journey just by looking at the country's first 3 presidents. You start with Václav Havel, the dissident playwright who became a philosopher king, a global symbol of the return to Western democracy. He's followed by Václav Klaus, a much more skeptical anti-EU figure. And finally, you get Miloš Zeman, a populist who actively cozied up to Russia and China. The path is pretty clear, a steady drift away from Havel's idealism.
And this all came to a head in a huge way in the 2023 presidential election. I mean, the choice for voters could not have been more different. On one side, you have Petr Pavel, a former top NATO general, basically promising a return to pro-Western values. On the other side, Andrej Babiš, a populist billionaire backed by the outgoing president who was openly questioning the country's commitments to its allies. This was a true fork in the road for the country.
And the result? It was a political earthquake. Turnout was at a record high, and voters gave Petr Pavel a massive victory. All across Europe, this was seen as this huge win for democracy, a firm rejection of the populist pro-Russian tide. It felt like the pendulum had finally, decisively swung back toward the West. So, game over, right? The West wins? Well, not so fast. And this is where we get back to our puzzle. See, this headline, while it's fictional, is completely plausible. Why? Because in the Czech system, the president and the prime minister are 2 different things. The president might be the head of state, but it's the parliament and the elections for parliament that decide who actually runs the government. And the populist movement, led by Andrej Babiš, is still incredibly popular and could absolutely win those elections.
And that's the key takeaway here. This isn't some kind of contradiction. It's the perfect example of that 1,000-year-old pendulum in action. The 2023 election didn't end the debate. It was just one swing, that deep fundamental tension between being part of the West and a populist desire to go it alone. That is the engine that drives Czech politics, and it's not going away.
Which leaves us with this final, sober thought from our hypothetical future. This quote, which we've imagined President Pavel giving in 2026, is really a call for wisdom. It's an acknowledgement that this nation's journey isn't a straight line. It's a constant, tricky navigation between these powerful historical forces. The Czech story is the story of a pendulum that has been swinging for a millennium, and its next direction, well, that's still to be decided.